Ta-ta! Hello kids, how are you doing? Buckle up because today is the day of the monster. Yeah, we're gonna draw a monster and we're gonna tell a monster story. Actually, we're just gonna make it up. The story of this monster is kinda sad, kinda funny, and definitely inspiring. Our story takes place in an ordinary village. There was nothing special about that place, but one day, a circus came to the village. Circus suddenly became the main attraction, and it stayed that way for a long time. And the village wasn't so boring anymore. Every night, people were going to the circus, and it was really fun. There was one problem. A monster was working at the circus. I mean, he was a comedian. He was like a clown at the circus. But people were scared of it. They were going to the circus with their children, and children were looking at the clown, and everybody was scared. But, I mean, they loved the circus. They just didn't want a monster in the circus. On the flip side, Monster had no problem with people. It loved people. It actually wanted to be closer with them. And he was really good at his job. I mean, he was a really funny monster. He was doing all those tricks like it was a really funny clown. Despite all his efforts, he couldn't stop the prejudice in people. And the children, we can't even blame them because they were fed with scary monster stories all their lives. Every time they hear a strange noise in their room or like a cracking sound in the middle of the night, they were thinking that it's a monster. I mean, I'm not saying all those kids are not telling the truth, but they didn't know if it was a monster or like a cricket or something. In short, despite everything he did, he couldn't blend in. People didn't want to accept him. Days were starting to get harder and harder for our monster. And the people in the village were getting antsy. They were talking between each other. There were rumors going around about the monster. None of them were true, but rumors are like that. They go around in circles and they grow and grow until people get really angry, even though they know nothing good comes out of anger. Monster didn't want to leave the village, not just yet. He still had some hope, because if he left, he would never come back. He was that kind of monster. I mean, he had pride. Still, the clock was ticking. A storm was coming. The village had never been quieter. When an angry group of people stopped listening to reason, bad things happen. And that's what happened that night. People held a meeting at Farmer Frank's barn. Things got so heated, they suddenly poured to the streets. They were shouting and screaming. They were saying all kinds of mean things about the monster. They were saying, "Monster, go home!" And they were saying, "Monster out, monster out, monster out of village!" The angry sounds of the people were mixing with the sounds of the thunders. Our monster could hear it all the way from his circus. He packed his bag very slowly. He left everything he had behind. He only packed a few clothes, and that was it. Monster wasn't just leaving this village for good. He was also leaving the clown business behind. He realized he couldn't make people laugh after all. But people were successful in making him cry. That was the first day the monster cried. The monster escaped the village that night with the help of his friends from the circus. Was everything better in the village? I don't think so. People weren't necessarily happier. In fact, the village lost some of its magic. It wasn't really like the old days before the circus, but it also wasn't like the time during the circus when the monster was working there as a clown. Members of the circus never really forgave the village people for what happened. because they lost a good friend and a hard worker. Plus, that night, some of the angry people ruined some of the tents inside the circus. They could rebuild the circus, but they couldn't bring their friend back. People weren't enjoying the circus as they used to either. Everything seemed the same on the surface, but there was something missing. They started to realize that even the monster was hard to look at for them. They were coming to the circus every night just to see the monster. All the other acts in the show was just regular stuff. I mean, they had seen people flipping all around and animals riding bicycles like 1,000 times before. But a monster clown was really something to talk about. Even the children were scared more at nights, because seeing the monster every night at the circus used to help them to overcome their fears. The most unexpected was about to happen. People started to miss the monster. Life in the village got worse and worse. It was so boring to live there, even more boring than the time before the circus, because people knew the potential of their village by now. They've seen what it could become. A lively place that's exciting to live in. Less and less people were visiting the village from outside. Shops were closing one after another. Another village on the other side of the river was becoming popular. All of the tourists that used to visit our village for their holidays were now going to the other village. It was said that the other village had a great opera house and that you could listen to the best singers of the world only there. There was one particular singer that people couldn't stop talking about. The voice of the shadow, everybody called him, because nobody knew his real name. More than that, nobody had ever seen his face, because he was singing behind a curtain and the light was hitting behind him and his shadow was hitting on the curtain, and that's what everybody in the audience saw when he was singing. A big shadow on a big curtain. So everybody called him the voice of the shadow. Curious people of our village, bored out of their minds, decided to cross the river to hear the so-called best singer of the world. They dressed up in their nicest clothes, as if they were attending to a royal invitation. Who knows, maybe they wanted to impress that singer. Maybe he would come to their village and sing for them too. The village on the other side of the river was booming with arts, culture, and business. People of our village were looking around in envy. Everybody was really kind and wearing a smile on their faces. They were really welcoming to strangers visiting their town, and they seemed very open to new ideas. The opera house wasn't a fancy place, but the crowd was fascinating. There were thousands of people waiting in line to hear the voice of the shadow. After a long wait, our village people finally got their seats in the audience. The lights went off, and everybody got really quiet. Suddenly, a giant shadow appeared on the huge white curtain. "I present you the world's greatest tenor," said the announcement. And the beautiful voice filled the opera house. Our guys suddenly recognized this voice, and the silhouette on the curtain looked really familiar to them. That's that clown! The monster!" shouted one of them. They quickly started to argue between each other. They were being really loud, and they were bothering other people in the audience, so they got kicked out of the opera house. They kept fighting out on the street, and they were all blaming each other. Most of them wanted to invite the monster back to their village, but a couple of them argued that the monster was ugly and hard to look at. Finally, Farmer Frank spoke. "Hey Bob, You are a very tall guy, and everybody makes fun of you because of that, and nobody wants to sit behind you in the movie theater. Is that nice? I mean, that makes you feel kind of sad, doesn't it? And that's how we treated to the monster. We were really mean to him. Everybody suddenly realized how awful they treated to the monster. They waited outside all night until the end of the show. As soon as the show was over, they rushed to the backstage to talk to the monster. They were begging. They were saying all kinds of nice things to the monster. They were apologizing just for him to come back to their village and sing for them, or even clown work and comedy would do. But Monster was over all of those. He had put all those things behind and he had a new life now. So the apology was accepted, but he rejected their offer. Because, like I said in the beginning, this monster had pride and he would never come back to a place he got kicked out. Plus, he had a really good life there and a lot of good friends. After all, it wasn't people in general that he couldn't get along with or fit in. It was just some people. And he found the right kind of people for himself in his new village. But you were a really good clown. You were really good at comedy, they said. Plus, you're still singing behind a curtain here, so people are treating you no different than we were. Yes, the monster said. I was really good at comedy. But there are a lot more emotions that I'd like to share with my audience and the world. And now I do that through singing. And please don't fool yourselves, friends. People really treat me differently here. If you want to know what the curtain is all about, it's just a part of the show.